The gullible are often the most dishonest. If they're foolish enough to believe the big lies of others, then they're foolish enough to expect others to believe their own deception. Dr. Michael J. Hurd. Reaction to the recent Amazon tax in Colorado demonstrates the demagogic aspects of public lies as an effort to use fraud to wield force against those that dissent. A collection of letters to the editor of the Denver Post demonstrates the echo effect. However, activist and scholar Diane Shea's letter correctly identifies the issue. Quote, "I don't blame Amazon. I blame our Colorado politicians for enacting an unjust law. They've made business through affiliates impossible in Colorado by imposing a mess of costly red tape and taxes. Amazon is not just a victim in this mess, but the primary victim. Honest people do not blame business for the sins of government." End quote. At Free Colorado, Ari Armstrong goes into detail about how the Colorado statute violates the protections of our federal Constitution. At Rule of Reason, novelist Edward Klein reviews Al Gore's defense of anthropomorphic global warming fraud and Gore's financial interest in advancing disinformation. Klein writes in part, quote, "Gore comes off sounding like a television evangelist, claiming that God exists, is all-merciful, and will forgive you your sins if you only obey him. The evangelist's audience is composed of stunted minds for whom the proofs that God is a metaphysical impossibility would roll off their frontal lobes like water off a duck. It is the same with Gore's true believers. They must believe, because they refuse to think and accept the evidence of their senses. These are the people, laymen and scientists alike, for whom faith is as trustworthy as certainty. So many people believe in anthropomorphic global warming. Decades ago it was global cooling. Who are they to question such an impressive consensus? It must be true." End quote. In response to Chief Justice Roberts' recent comments, George F. Will attacks the custom of the State of the Union speech and calls for a general boycott of the process. Will is entirely wrong, and his explanation demonstrates the second-hand nature of conservative thinking, with its emphasis on non-essentials and deference to the out-of-context thoughts and actions of the past titans. The defects of the current State of the Union practice is symptomatic of the defects of our recent presidents. Will advocates ignoring the symptoms as a solution to the problem. Of course, the defect is that the American people have been selecting inferior individuals to be president. The New York Times reports, for more than a decade, the Kansas City School Board evaded the reality of their failing schools, and now fiscal reality has resulted in a plan to close 28 of their 61 public schools. In the past decade, enrollment has been halved as individuals choose suburban districts and charter schools as a solution to their own children's education. Fewer than 25% of the school district students perform at grade level. During his campaign, candidate Obama promised that his presidency would strengthen our relationships in the world. Recently, the European Parliament responded to the administration's diplomacy by ending cooperation with the U.S. in fighting terrorist financing, which reverses a major diplomatic achievement of the Bush administration. Now, the Washington Post reports that Secretary of State Clinton is threatening Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu with weakening our bilateral relations in an effort to compel him to negotiate with terrorists. The Obama administration's efforts to embrace our enemies and rebuff our friends has done the opposite of what candidate Obama promised. This reminds me of Jackson Deal's report that administration officials had trouble identifying any foreign leader with whom President Obama had formed a strong personal relationship, and the most credible claim was Dmitry Medvedev, the puppet president of Russia, which makes sense as they have so much in common in that regard. Paul McKeever, leader of Ontario's Freedom Party, reports on dishonest public budgeting and its tendency for cost overruns in opposing public financing of the 2015 Pan Am Games in Toronto. McKeever reminds the taxpayers that the original budget for this year's Vancouver Olympics was $874 million, which was exceeded by solely the actual expense of security, while estimates for actual costs are $6 billion. Retrospectively, the anticipated and actual costs for Social Security and Medicare would demonstrate a similar duplicity, which could be exceeded by the enactment of Pelosi Care. In a recent YouTube video, ex-Senate parliamentarian Robert Dove expounds upon the history of Senate rules that have been subject to dishonest political attacks upon the role the Senate plays within our constitutional system. He concludes that the current issues within the Senate operations are not the fault of the rules, but the fault of the current senators. Those are the stories which mattered to me on March 12, 2010. All the links are available on my blog. I invite you to participate by rating, favoriting, sharing, and commenting upon this video.